My father looked me dead in the eyes and said I was the stupidest mistake he ever made. He said I should take my wife and our problems and get out of his house. He gave me 1 hour to pack 18 years of my life into whatever I could carry. And my mother, she just sat there at the dinner table staring at her plate like it held the secrets of the universe. 9 years later, I was standing in my home office looking out at my 6-acre estate in Ridgewood, New Jersey, when my security team called. There was an older couple at my gate. They said they were my parents. And for the first time in almost a decade, I smiled thinking about Gerald and Margaret Hall, because the stupid mistake they threw away was about to decide if they were even worth a conversation. My name is Phoenix Hall. I was 18 years old when my world collapsed. And I need to tell you how I built a new one from the wreckage. Growing up in Ridgewood, I was never the son my father wanted. Gerald Hall owned a mid-sized construction company, and from the moment I was born, he made his disappointment clear. He wanted a son who would be tough, aggressive, traditional. He got me instead, a kid who was sensitive, creative, more interested in design than demolition. While other boys my age were learning to hunt and talk about sports statistics, I was sketching buildings in my notebooks, spending summers reluctantly hauling materials at his construction sites and pretending to care about things that bored me to death. Even though I secretly wanted to study architecture, my father had a plan for me. I was going to take over Hall Construction and continue his legacy. The fact that I had different dreams was just an inconvenience he chose to ignore. I got pretty good at ignoring my own feelings too. I learned to swallow my aspirations, to perform, to achieve in ways he approved of. I studied business at Rutgers because that's what he expected. I got decent grades because anything less meant a lecture about wasted potential. I became a people pleaser, always chasing approval that never quite came. Looking back, I realize I could calculate load-bearing requirements with my eyes closed, but I still couldn't have an honest conversation with my father about who I actually was. Some education, right? My mother, Margaret, was a different kind of problem. She wasn't cruel. She was just absent in every way that mattered. She floated through our house like a ghost, never disagreeing with my father, never standing up for me, never making a single wave. I used to think she was weak. Later, I realized she had simply made her choice a long time ago, and that choice was comfort over courage. If someone had told me back then that in just 8 months, I would lose everything, my family, my future, and the girl I thought loved me, all in the same 24 hours, I would have laughed. But life has a cruel sense of timing, and mine was about to run out. Then there was Jessica Martinez. Looking back now, I should have known that any girl whose smile could convince you the sky was green was probably lying about the color of everything else too. But I was 17 and desperate to be loved by someone who actually saw me for who I was. We met at a community college party. She was beautiful, ambitious, and when this 18-year-old nursing student started talking about our future like it was already written in the stars, I believed every single word. We got married at the courthouse 3 months after meeting, young, stupid, and convinced we were different from every other couple who rushed into marriage. After 18 years of being told I wasn't enough for my father, here was someone who made me feel like I was everything. I fell hard. 5 months into our marriage, Jessica found out she was pregnant. Terrified doesn't begin to cover what I felt. But Jessica seemed happy at first. She talked about baby names, about nursery colors, about building a family together. I let myself believe her. I let myself hope. That was my first mistake. Jessica started pulling away, stressed about school, she said. Worried about her future, she said. I pushed down my worries because I needed someone to be on my side. My second mistake was telling my parents alone, without her there beside me. I planned to announce the pregnancy at Sunday dinner. Jessica was supposed to be there with me, but she canceled last minute. Family emergency, she claimed. So I sat alone across from Gerald and Margaret Hall, pushed my food around my plate, and finally said the words that would change everything. My hands went ice cold under the table. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, pounding so loud I was certain they could hear it across the dining room. My father's face went through several stages, confusion first, then disbelief, then something cold and hard settled into his features, something I had never seen before in 18 years. My mother just froze, her fork halfway to her mouth, a statue in silence. Gerald didn't yell at first. That would have been easier. Instead, he spoke in this quiet, controlled voice that was somehow worse than any scream. He talked about his plans for me, about how I was supposed to take over the company, about how an 18-year-old married father would destroy his reputation in the business community, about how he had spent 18 years trying to mold me into something useful, and this was how I repaid him. Then the quiet broke. He stood up so fast his chair fell backward and crashed against the hardwood floor. The sound made me flinch like a gunshot. And then he said words that I will carry with me until the day I die. He said I was just a stupid mistake from his past. He said he should have been tougher on me instead of wasting his time. He told me to take my wife and my problems and get out of his house. I looked at my mother, begged her with my eyes to say something, anything, to defend me just this once. She stared at her plate like it was the most fascinating thing she had ever seen. Gerald gave me 1 hour. I packed 2 duffel bags with shaking hands. 18 years of existence crammed into whatever would fit. My mother didn't come to my room. Didn't offer help. Didn't say goodbye. I could hear the television turn on downstairs, some game show with cheerful music while I erased myself from my childhood home. I walked out the front door and never looked back. In my car, I called Jessica. No answer. I called again. Voicemail. I sent a text with trembling fingers telling her my father had kicked me out, telling her I needed her. 3 hours I waited for a response. 3 hours of sitting in a dark parking lot watching my phone screen like it held my entire future. Then her message came through, and whatever was left of my naive heart shattered into pieces so small I wasn't sure I'd ever find them all. 10 words. That's all she gave me. After 8 months of marriage, after all those conversations about our future, after creating a life together, 10 words on a glowing screen in a dark parking lot. I can't do this. Filing for annulment. Don't contact me. I didn't listen. Of course I didn't. I called her probably 40 times that night. Every call went straight to voicemail until eventually the number just stopped connecting at all. She had blocked me, her husband. The next morning, I drove to our apartment, the tiny studio we'd been renting together. The locks had been changed. A note was taped to the door telling me my belongings were in storage and I'd receive the information by mail. Just like that, my wife of 8 months had erased me from her life. I later found out through a mutual friend that Jessica had already terminated the pregnancy and moved back in with her parents. She wanted the marriage annulled like it never happened, like I was just a bad decision she needed to erase from her history. I realized that I had never really known her at all. The girl I thought I loved was just an idea I had projected onto someone who had been making completely different plans all along. So there I was, 18 years old, disowned and abandoned in the span of 24 hours. I had $412 in my savings account. My father had already called every relative we had, poisoning the well before I could even reach out. My uncle tried to send me money secretly, but Gerald found out and threatened to cut him off completely. I found a room in a boarding house in Newark. It smelled like mildew and broken dreams, but it was $70 a week, and that was all I could afford. I worked 3 jobs. Mornings at a bakery starting at 4 a.m., covered in flour and exhaustion. Afternoons at a warehouse, loading trucks until my back screamed. Evenings at a call center getting yelled at by strangers until 10 p.m. I would fall into my tiny bed, sleep for 5 hours, and do it all again. I survived on ramen noodles, day-old bread from the bakery, and a level of anxiety that probably should have had its own zip code. To this day, I'm worth millions, and I still can't look at instant ramen without my eye twitching a little. Some traumas stay with you. The wound that cut deepest wasn't my father's rage, though. It was my mother's silence. Margaret Hull had watched her only son get thrown out into the world, alone and struggling, and she had said nothing, done nothing, chosen nothing except the path of least resistance. A few months after I was kicked out, I wrote my mother a letter. I poured my heart onto that paper. I told her how much I was struggling, how scared I was, how I just needed to know someone still cared about me. I begged her to help, to choose me over him just this once. Her response came 2 weeks later. One paragraph. She said my father thought it was best if they moved on. She said she was sorry. Sorry. That single word, so small and weak and useless. It was worse than silence. At least silence didn't pretend to care. But here's the thing about rock bottom, once you're there, there's nowhere to go but up. And I learned that year that I was stronger than I ever knew. The turning point came from an unexpected source, a tough, no-nonsense 65-year-old man named Marcus Washington who ran a struggling property management company and had zero patience for excuses. I got an entry-level job at his firm when I was 19, filing paperwork, answering phones, making coffee that Marcus always complained was too weak. But Marcus noticed things. He noticed I stayed late without being asked. He noticed I caught errors in contracts that had slipped past everyone else. He noticed I had the kind of hunger that comes from having nothing and everything to prove. One day, he called me into his office and asked me what I wanted to do with my life. I told him I wanted to never be powerless again. He nodded like that was the only acceptable answer and started teaching me everything he knew. Marcus had built his company from nothing after losing everything in a bad business deal. He understood survival. He understood what it meant to be underestimated. And he saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself yet. I discovered I had a gift for real estate. Not the flashy sales pitch kind, but something more valuable. I could look at a neglected property, a building everyone else saw as a lost cause, and see exactly what it could become. I saw potential where others saw decay. My first successful negotiation was convincing my landlord not to evict me by offering to personally fix the building's broken plumbing. I spent an entire weekend with a wrench, a YouTube tutorial, and more curse words than I'm proud of. But when I finished, I realized something important: I could solve problems that other people gave up on. I got my real estate license while working full-time. I studied at 2 a.m., textbooks spread across my kitchen table, drinking enough coffee to fuel a small spacecraft. I failed my first practice exam and punched a wall. Then I patched the hole in the wall and studied harder. When I passed that licensing exam, I held the certificate in my hands and cried. Not sad tears, survivor tears. The kind that come when you realize you might actually make it after all. My first sale was a tiny condo that had been sitting on the market for 9 months. Nobody wanted it. The location was weird, the layout was awkward, and it smelled vaguely of cigarettes and regret. I staged it myself with furniture from thrift stores and tricks I learned from home improvement shows. That condo sold in 3 weeks. My commission was $2,800, more money than I had seen in a year of struggling. I remember depositing that check and just staring at my bank balance, watching the numbers change, feeling something I hadn't felt since before my father's words destroyed everything. I felt hope. Marcus promoted me, gave me more listings, started treating me less like an employee and more like a protege. I learned the business inside and out, absorbing everything he taught me like a sponge that had been thirsty for decades. But success doesn't come without setbacks. I struggled constantly with a voice in my head that sounded exactly like my father. Every time I reached for something bigger, that voice told me I was just a stupid mistake. Every time I doubted myself, Gerald Hall's words echoed through my thoughts like a curse I couldn't break. Marcus noticed. He sat me down one afternoon and shared his own story of being dismissed and doubted. His business partners had betrayed him. Banks had refused to give him loans because of his past failures. He looked me dead in the eyes and said something I have never forgotten. The best revenge isn't proving them wrong. The best revenge is forgetting they exist while you build your kingdom. Around this time, Jessica decided to resurface. She found me on social media when I was 21 years old. Her message was all false nostalgia and carefully worded questions. She had heard I was doing better. She wanted to reconnect. She thought maybe we could talk about what happened. What she meant was she had heard I wasn't destitute anymore and wanted to either ease her guilt or see if there was money to be had. I screenshot every message, saved them in a folder, and never responded. Let her wonder. Let her wait forever. Through industry connections, I started hearing whispers about hall construction. My father had overextended during a building boom, taken bad loans with worse terms, and his company was slowly bleeding out. His pride wouldn't let him admit it. Margaret had to let go of their housekeeper. They stopped going on their annual vacation. Small cracks in the facade that only someone watching closely would notice. I noticed. I didn't feel satisfaction. Not yet. I was too busy building my own empire to waste energy on his crumbling one. By the time I was 25 years old, I had learned something important about myself. I wasn't just a survivor. I was a builder. Marcus decided to retire. 65 years of working, fighting, and proving everyone wrong had earned him a cabin in the mountains where nobody knew his name and nobody needed his expertise. Before he left, he sat me down and offered me his entire client list at a price so low it was practically a gift. I tried to argue, tried to pay him what it was actually worth. He just looked at me with those sharp eyes that had seen everything and said this was his investment in the future. He said he wanted to watch what I would build, and he couldn't do that if I was broke from overpaying him. Then he handed me a bottle of whiskey, told me not to open it until I made my first million, and walked out the door. I still have that bottle. I'm saving it for something even bigger now. I launched Phoenix Rise Properties from a tiny office in Hoboken with one desk, one chair, and more ambition than square footage. The name wasn't subtle, but subtlety had never gotten me anywhere. I was a phoenix, I had burned, and I had risen. Anyone who had a problem with that could take it up with my profit margins. My specialty became finding neglected properties in neighborhoods that were about to transform, buildings everyone else dismissed as lost causes. I would buy them, restore them with care and intelligence, and sell them for considerably more than I paid. My first major project was a condemned apartment building in Jersey City that the city was about to demolish. I saw potential where everyone else saw rubble. 18 months and a lot of sleepless nights later, I had converted it into luxury condos that sold out in 6 weeks. That project made me $1.1 million in profit. I remember sitting in my new office staring at the numbers, trying to make them feel real. 7 years earlier, I'd been eating ramen in a boarding house, wondering how I'd make rent. Now I was a millionaire. Not inherited wealth, not family money, mine. Every dollar earned through work and will and refusing to quit when quitting would have been so much easier. I deliberately kept a low profile during those years. Used my business name on everything, rarely my personal name. No social media presence, no photographs in industry publications, no flashy displays of success. My office was in Hoboken, far from Ridgewood and the people who used to know me. Anyone from my old life wouldn't have recognized the confident businessman in tailored suits who closed deals worth more than their houses. The transformation from struggling teenager to real estate developer still surprises me sometimes. I went from owning 2 pairs of work pants to having a closet organized by season and occasion. I still keep those original 2 pairs, though. They're framed in my closet like art. Some people hang diplomas. I hang polyester blend reminders of where I started. Through it all, I remained focused, driven by the memory of that night in the parking lot, by my father's words, by my mother's silence. I wasn't planning revenge. I was simply too busy for revenge. But if my success happened to shine a light on exactly what they threw away, well, that was just good positioning. By the time I was 27, I had built something remarkable. I had properties across 3 states, a team of 15 people working for me, and a reputation in the industry as someone who could turn disasters into gold. I met someone too, Elena Rodriguez, an architect who specialized in historic preservation. She was 30 years old, brilliant at her work, and patient in a way that felt foreign to me. We met at an industry conference. She was presenting on sustainable restoration. I was pretending to take notes while actually calculating the return on investment of every project she mentioned. She asked me to coffee afterward. I said yes immediately. Unlike Jessica, Elena was genuine. She wasn't interested in what I could give her, she had her own successful career. She was interested in who I was beneath the success, beneath the armor I had built around myself. It took time for me to trust her, to let someone in again. But Elena didn't rush me. She just showed up consistently, respected my boundaries, and proved through actions instead of words that she was exactly who she appeared to be. By the time I was 28, Elena and I were living together in a beautiful loft in Hoboken. She had earned that place in my life the hard way, which is the only way that matters. Then I saw the listing, Thornfield Estate. 6 bedrooms, 4 acres, a historic property in Ridgewood that had been on the market for 2 years because the asking price was ambitious and the renovation needs were significant. It was 3 miles from my parents' house. The property had incredible bones, and I could already see exactly what it could become. I told myself I was buying it because it was a good investment, because it was in one of the best areas in New Jersey, because the property had tremendous potential. All of that was true. But I would be lying if I said I didn't smile when I signed those papers. Some purchases are practical. Some purchases are poetic. This one was both. We moved into Thornfield Estate 2 weeks before my 27th birthday. I was self-made, successful beyond anything my 18-year-old self could have imagined. I had a partner who had earned my trust and a home that belonged entirely to me. I didn't think about my parents. I didn't need to. But Ridgewood is a small town, and secrets have a very short lifespan. The whispers started within days of my moving in. Ridgewood isn't a big place. People talk. People notice. And when the disowned son of Gerald Hall suddenly appears in a historic estate worth more than most people's lifetime earnings, people definitely talk. I heard the rumors secondhand through Elena, who heard them from a colleague who heard them from a neighbor. Did you hear Gerald Hall's son is back? The one he kicked out years ago. He's living in Thornfield Estate. Can you believe it? The rumors spread through Ridgewood like wildfire through dry grass. Everyone knew except, apparently, Gerald and Margaret Hall. They existed in their own bubble of denial, still pretending their reputation was intact, still believing no one knew about their financial troubles or their discarded son. Margaret found out first, her book club, of all things. Some well-meaning friend asked if she was excited about having Phoenix back in town. Margaret apparently went pale as paper and excused herself early. She told Gerald that night. I can only imagine how that conversation went. His face when he realized his stupid mistake, the son he had thrown away like garbage, was now living in a house he could never afford. The son he had erased from his life was worth more than he would ever be again. Gerald didn't believe it at first. Couldn't believe it. He researched Phoenix Rise properties obsessively, according to what I heard later. Found the portfolio, the awards, the industry recognition. Found photographs of me at conferences, shaking hands with mayors and developers, looking nothing like the crying kid he had given 1 hour to pack his life. I imagine his face went through several stages during that research. Confusion, denial, recognition, and finally something he probably hadn't felt in years, desperation. It was a Saturday morning when the call came. I was in my home office reviewing plans for a new development project, drinking coffee and enjoying the quiet. Elena was in the garden, working on landscape designs for our property. My security team called, very professional, very neutral. They informed me there was an older couple at the main gate. The couple claimed to be my parents and requested entry to the property. My heart stopped. Then it started again, faster than before. I looked out the window at my estate, my home, the life I had built with my own two hands, and refused help from anyone who had once rejected me. I told security to inform them I would be there shortly. Then I made them wait 47 minutes. I would love to tell you it wasn't pettiness, that I genuinely needed that time to compose myself, to prepare what I would say, to settle my nerves. And that was partly true. But I would be lying if I said there wasn't some satisfaction in knowing Gerald Hall was standing outside a gate, waiting for permission to enter while his son took his time deciding if he was worth the effort. Some things you earn through patience. Other things you earn through making people wait. When I finally walked down to the gate, I saw them clearly for the first time in 9 years. Gerald had aged badly. The stress of financial ruin was written across his face in deep lines and gray skin. He had lost weight, but not in a healthy way, in the way that comes from worry eating you alive from the inside. Margaret stood slightly behind him, smaller and frilier than I remembered. Her eyes were red like she had been crying recently. Gerald tried to smile when he saw me. It was the most pathetic thing I have ever witnessed in my life. This man who had screamed at me, who had called me a stupid mistake, who had given me 60 minutes to erase myself from his existence, was now attempting to look warm and fatherly. The performance was so bad it would have been funny if it wasn't so tragic. He started talking immediately, didn't even wait for me to speak. Words tumbled out of his mouth about family and misunderstandings and water under bridges and moving forward. He talked about how proud he was of what I had built. Proud. The man who told me I was worthless was now claiming pride in my success. Margaret said nothing. She just stared at the estate behind me, at the gardens, at the evidence of the life her son had built without any help from her. I wondered what she was thinking. I wondered if she felt regret or just envy. I let Gerald finish his speech. It took a while. He had clearly rehearsed it, though not well enough to make it convincing. When he finally stopped talking, I spoke for the first time. I didn't yell. I had imagined this moment for years, and in my imagination, I always yelled, screamed all the pain and anger and hurt that had been festering inside me. But standing there looking at this diminished man who used to terrify me, I felt something unexpected. Calm. I told him that he had called me a stupid mistake. That he had told me I was nothing. That he had erased me from his life like I had never existed. I reminded Margaret that she had written me a letter choosing his comfort over her own son. That her sorry was not enough then and would never be enough now. Gerald's facade cracked. He admitted the company was bankrupt. They were about to lose the house. Everything he had built was gone, and he needed help. He actually said those words to me. He said I had to help them because they were my parents. I almost laughed. Almost. Because here was the man who had refused to be my father when I needed him, demanding that I be his son now that he needed me. He finally saw me as capable, but only because he needed my checkbook. I looked at my father for a long moment. Really looked at him. This man who had shaped my entire childhood with his disappointment and demands. Who had made me feel like a failure simply for being sensitive, for having dreams different from his. Who had thrown me away when I needed him most and expected me to come running back when he needed me. Then I looked at my mother, the woman who had chosen silence over love, who had watched her only son get discarded and done nothing, who had written, sorry, in a letter like that single word could bandage a wound that went bone deep. And I smiled. Not with cruelty. Not with vengeance. Not with the satisfaction of watching them suffer. I smiled because I realized, standing there in front of my beautiful home with Elena's laughter in the background, that I didn't need anything from them anymore. Not their approval. Not their regret. Not even their acknowledgement of how wrong they had been. I was free. I told Gerald I wasn't going to help him. Not because I wanted him to suffer, but because I didn't owe him anything. He had made that clear 9 years ago when he gave me 1 hour to pack my life into duffel bags. The debt between us was settled the moment I walked out his door. I told him I had built a life that had nothing to do with him. That was my legacy, not saving people who threw me away when I was at my lowest. Then I turned to Margaret specifically. I told her she could have left him. She could have chosen me. She could have been a mother when it mattered. She didn't. That was her right, her choice to make. And this was mine. Gerald tried anger first. Raised his voice, talked about everything he had done for me growing up. Tried to make me feel guilty. It bounced off me like rain off glass. His anger had no power anymore. Then he tried guilt, reminded me they were old, that they had nowhere to go, that I was their only child. I felt nothing. The guilt he was trying to summon had been burned out of me years ago. Finally, he tried something that looked almost like genuine remorse. His voice cracked. His eyes got wet. He said he was sorry, that he had been wrong, that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. Too little. 9 years too late. I told him I hoped he found peace, but he wouldn't find it here. Not at my gate, not in my home, not in my life. Margaret spoke for the first time since they had arrived. Her voice was small, barely above a whisper. She asked if we could just talk, if there was any chance of rebuilding what was broken. For one moment, my heart wavered. This was my mother. The woman who had made me breakfast before school, who had bandaged my scraped knees when I was little, before Gerald's expectations crushed everything soft between us. Then I remembered the letter. I remembered, sorry. I remembered the years of silence. The years of choosing him over me. The years of letting me struggle alone while she preserved her comfortable life. I told her that some things, once broken, can't be fixed. That I had spent 9 years learning to live without parents, and I had gotten pretty good at it. Margaret's face crumpled. Gerald put his arm around her, still trying to maintain some dignity, still playing the role of protective husband, even though he had protected nothing. They left slowly, like they were hoping I would change my mind. I watched them walk back to their car, a vehicle that was older than it should have been, showing the kind of wear that comes from deferred maintenance and stretched budgets. They drove away. I stood at my gate until their car disappeared around the corner, and I felt lighter with every inch of distance between us. Elena came up a few minutes later. She asked if I was okay. I looked at my partner, this woman who had chosen me every single day without being asked, who had earned her place in my life through consistency and love. I told her I was better than okay. I was free. That evening, we sat in the garden watching the sunset, eating food that I had actually paid someone else to cook because I could afford that now, because I had built something from nothing and I was allowed to enjoy it. I looked at my life, at the woman who had earned my trust through patience and consistency, at the home that belonged entirely to me, paid for with money I had made through my own intelligence and effort. Not a single piece of it came from Gerald or Margaret Hall. And that's exactly the way it should be. Those who throw away their children don't get to claim their success. I rose from the ashes because I had to. My parents never even tried to strike the match. I built my empire on the rubble of their rejection. And standing in my garden that evening, I realized something profound: their biggest mistake wasn't kicking me out. It was teaching me that I didn't need them to survive. I had proven them wrong in every way that mattered. Not for revenge. Not for vindication. But for me. For that scared 18-year-old kid sitting in a parking lot, wondering if he'd ever be worth anything. I was worth everything. And I had built it all myself. The stupid mistake they threw away became the success story they would never be part of. And I was perfectly fine with that.